In my last video, I was out shooting with a camera system that I had on loan to try out, and I've still got it. It's the OM Systems OM1 Mark II Micro Four Thirds. In that first video, I'd only just got the camera, but I went out and did some photography, a bit of wildlife, a bit of landscape, talked a little bit about why I was thinking of going down this route, how I'd managed to get the camera to try it out, shared some images and some initial thoughts on this kit. Now, if you haven't watched that video, it makes a good background to this video, so I'll stick a link to it up there now, and there'll also be a link in the video description if you want to check it out. Today I'm out with this camera again, and I want to talk a little bit more about the lenses that I've chosen to try and what my thoughts are on them now. Tackle the subject of image quality, of course take a few more images with this kit, and hopefully try out maybe one or two of the special features in this camera and share my final thoughts on whether or not this is going to be the right system for me. I hope you'll enjoy the video. If you do and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Okay, we'll start off with the 12-100 f4 Pro lens. Like all of the Pro lenses, fully weather sealed. It's got an IP something rating that I can't remember. And the image stabilization in the lens synchronizes with the image stabilization in the body, so that they work together. So it increases the amount of image stabilization that you get. What actually appealed to me about this lens was the focal length range, 12mm to 100mm. Full frame field of view terms, that's 24 to 200. That makes this a superb walk around lens. You know, if I was going out for a walk somewhere in a park or in the countryside, you know, I could probably get away with just taking this and taking pictures with it and not needing anything else for those kind of shots. The image quality on this lens appears to be excellent. I only took 2 images with it when I took it out on the first trip, and those images came out very nicely. Lots and lots of fine detail, even zoomed in to 200%, which I often think is not a realistic measure anyway. I often think it's interesting, if you're looking at image quality, to see what you can do with the image in terms of pushing it in some way. So what I actually did with one of the images that I shot with this lens was I ran it through the Lightroom Classic Enhance mode, which is basically a resizer. It makes the image a lot bigger. Now, when I've done that on images from my Canon M50, the end results have been awful. Lots of artifacting, they just don't look right. This one, I ran the raw file through and then just applied exactly the same processing as I had on the original file, and the end result is amazing. I mean, it's an 80 megapixel image. It's gone from 20 to 80, and it looks absolutely fine. There's no artifacting or anything. Now, I'm not saying that that's the kind of thing I want to do with these images. In fact, I almost never would. But I just thought it was an interesting experiment to look at the image quality you could get from this. And in fact, the 20 megapixel images are perfectly fine. And even if you crop them down a bit to, you know, 16 or even 12, you could still make very large prints out of them if you wanted to. The next lens to talk about is this one. This is the 7-14 f2.8 Pro. Again, Pro lens, again weather sealed, again the image stabilisation in the lens synchronises with the image stabilisation in the body. And what appealed to me about this one was that 7mm wide angle, because it's pretty extreme wide angle. I do wish in some ways that I'd also borrowed the 8-25 f4 Pro, because it does have some advantages over this one. The 8-25 is a little tiny bit lighter, not much. It's a little bit cheaper. That's not a big issue. It obviously has a little bit more reach, 8-25 as opposed to 7-14. And what that means is that it's much more useful as a walkabout lens in, say, a town where you can do most of the photography with that focal range. That's 16 to 50mm full frame equivalent field of view. And it also has a normal flat front, whereas this one has a domed front, which means you can't use ordinary filters on this. Now that may not be a big issue. I don't normally use polarizers on wide angles anyway. And in terms of ND filters, well, this has got up to 7 stops ND with the live ND feature in the camera. But nevertheless, being able to use ordinary filters on it might be a good thing. So what it really comes down to on this one is that extra millimetre at the wide angle lens, 2mm equivalent, worth all of the other factors? Now, if I decide that the 7-14 isn't the way to go and the 8-25 would be better, I've got no qualms about deciding to buy that, if I buy any of this stuff, simply because I'm convinced about the quality here. So I think what it really comes down to is 7 as opposed to 8mm, worth the extra little bit of weight, little bit of money, and maybe a little bit of extra hassle from time to time. The shots I've taken in town with the 7-14, both at 7mm and at 8mm, I'm not sure there's a significant difference. You know, simply stepping back slightly when moving to 8mm seems to be roughly the same effect. There's obviously a slight perspective difference, but it may be that in a different environment that extra bit of field of view might be an advantage, so I'll check that out later on when I move on to a different location. One of the things I did notice about this lens, although the image quality again was excellent, quite susceptible to flare. That's probably because of the domed front. So one of the images I shot where the sun was coming from the side, there was distinct flare spots across the scene. Nothing drastic, I could easily have taken them out in post, but I decided not to in the last video. But that's something to bear in mind, that that domed front, the same as on my fisheye lens for the Canon, which has a domed front, does make it more susceptible to flare. So jury's still out on whether, if I go down this route of this camera, whether the 7-14 or the 8-25 would be the way to go. I guess we'll see after I do some shots with this later on. But maybe now we should try the third and final lens. This is the lens I used the most in the last video for wildlife. It's a 100-400 f5 to f6.3. It's not part of the Pro range, and that is noticeable in that it doesn't feel quite as nice perhaps build-wise as the others, but it still feels pretty nice. It's still fully weather sealed. I think it's still got the same IP rating. The image stabilisation in this lens does not synchronise with the image stabilisation in the camera, so you do have to be a bit careful they don't conflict with each other. Apparently, I haven't really had a chance to figure that out yet. What appeals to me about this lens is, again, the range, 100-400, that's full frame equivalent field of view of 200 to 800. And you could still use teleconverters with this, a 1.4 or a 2 times, which gives us a really crazy range. You know, with a 2 times converter, that would be full frame equivalent of 1600, which is mad. Image quality from this, again, looked superb. Maybe, just maybe, not quite as sharp as with the other 2 lenses, but I only really noticed that when I did something crazy, like again, running one of the images through the enhance mode in Lightroom Classic to turn it into an 80 megapixel image, and there was just some artifacting started to appear in it. Although, to be fair, maybe if I'd processed that image slightly differently, that artifacting wouldn't have been there. And certainly you could take it up to 36, 40 megapixels easily. So the image quality on this is very, very nice. I think if dedicated wildlife photographers would recommend maybe the 300mm f4 lens, which is a fixed focal length, but I want the flexibility, or they would recommend the 150 to 400, which I think is an f4, but that is significantly heavier and about 4 times the price, I think, which I just don't think I can justify for what I do. But this is a very nice lens, and as I said, the image quality from it appears to be excellent. Over here is the water wheel, and I photographed it from the other side. Long walk round, getting in quite in close to it, but it's very difficult to photograph it from this side because you can't get anywhere near it. But with this lens on, I can actually kind of fill the frame with it from here without even going all the way in. I'm only in at maybe about 300mm. I can probably fill the frame with it. The image quality that I've seen so far from this setup is excellent. I did put a note up in the last video that said the quality was excellent, apart from where I'd made mistakes. And that came down to 2 things. One is I'd had the camera for like 4 hours. I'd barely had my hands on the controls, basically charged it up and went out. And that meant that maybe I didn't have the settings quite as they should have been for what I was trying to do, particularly when I was shooting some of the wildlife. And the second thing is I've got some muscle memory from using the little Canon. So there are certain things that you do in certain situations, and I was doing them without thinking, but of course the controls were in different places. So on a couple of occasions I ended up adjusting the shutter speed instead of the aperture, which meant I ended up with a shutter speed that was too slow for a moving subject, and it ends up blurry. But in general, the autofocus and everything else worked perfectly, and the images I got, the quality, as I said, I was really impressed. All of that was yesterday. I didn't have enough time when I finished that walk yesterday to make it to my next location, which is down that way on the beach near Guadamar del Segura. I really want to play around a bit more with that wide angle lens and look at the 7 to 8mm difference, so that it will maybe help me to decide, if I decide to buy this kit, which one would be the best lens to go for. But I also want to have a little play around with one of the computational processes in this camera, one of the computational features, which is Live ND. Now, Live ND is basically a software-based ND filter, which enables you to extend exposure time up to 7 stops on this particular camera. And I'm thinking that might be a really useful thing to have. And I must confess, I did do a little tryout shot yesterday at the water wheel, more to familiarise myself with how to do it than anything else. And I really didn't think the image was going to come out, because I shot handheld at 100mm, so that's 200mm full frame equivalent, for 1 second. So I thought it was going to be all shaky, you know, everything was going to be blurry. I was really surprised to see how it had come out. The things that are supposed to be moving and therefore supposed to be blurry, like the water, like the wheel, even the grasses moving in the wind, are appropriately blurry. But all of the stuff that's supposed to be sharp is, at that focal length, handheld for that exposure time, that's pretty amazing. So I'm really keen to have another go at that today and see how things work out. I also tested out one other thing that was a minor concern based on what some people have said about these small sensors, and that is their ability to handle low light, high ISO images. In other words, how much noise they create. So I took a test shot, not exactly an inspiring scene, but it let me shoot at ISO 3200. In Lightroom, I opened the shadows all the way up and even boosted the exposure a bit. And yeah, there's some noise in there, but it's not disastrous. And a quick pass through denoise, even with some very low denoise settings, produces a very, very clean image. So I have no concerns whatsoever about the capability of this camera to handle higher ISO images, or at least as high as I'm ever likely to want to do. I'm going to try some fairly low down shots of the water kind of washing up on the beach, but I'm also going to put the live ND on and just try to get a sense of movement in the water. Taken a few shots now with the 7-14 lens, some at 7mm, some at 8mm, and I'll have shown you some of them, probably not all of them because I don't want to bore you completely, but hopefully enough for me to evaluate which lens would be the most suitable. I was planning on staying here until sunset, but I'm looking over that way and it's just completely socked in with cloud, and that's where the sun's going to be setting. There's not a single gap. I can't see that we're going to get any kind of sunset effect. So I'm probably just going to play around maybe with a couple more shots and then I might call it and head for home. I'm going to pop the 12 to 100 back on briefly. I've taken a few shots now with the wide angle lens, and I've also had a play with the live ND feature, so I think I can evaluate those quite nicely. We're not going to get a sunset tonight, I'm 99.9% sure, and these trips out have been about evaluating this camera and deciding if I'm going to buy it. Am I? I would say almost certainly yes. It's a lovely bit of kit, and I've really enjoyed shooting with it this last few days, and I think I'll be spending some money. I'm just not quite sure yet whether it's going to be with the 7-14 lens or with the 8-25, but certainly the 12-100 and the 100-400. So look out for a new version in some later videos. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, don't forget about giving it a like, sharing it on social media, and of course leave me a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, so thank you very much. And until next week, whatever that's going to be, bye.